In today's video, I'll take you through the steps I took to build the 48 scale Tamiya NASHORN and get it ready for paint. I've big plans for this one, so be sure to join me for the ride. And remember, stick around for some historical footage at the end of the video. G'day guys, I'm Clayton and this is Workbench Hobbies.
Trying to pick up the communications from the tank.
Hey folks, thanks for joining me again. For a guy who considers himself as a 35th scale armour modeler, I seem to keep finding my way back to 48 scale. I love the kits because they're quick to build, which means I can get to the bits I love the most, the painting and the weathering. This vehicle was also the subject of an out-of-box group build I joined, so the temptation to overcomplicate the build had been removed for me. The NASHORN, the Rhino is such a beautiful looking machine and was an easy choice for me to choose for my next build. Construction begins with the hull on the side walls of the chassis being attached. The deck of the fighting compartment is also set in place. Whilst it could be seen as a little bit of a gimmick, I always include the small metal weights that come with the kit. I like the feel of the model in my hand when I'm painting it and the sense of weight that it gives the model. The deck of the fighting compartment was sprayed in a mix of hull red and black, and this would be the foundation for the chipping colour that would soon follow. The underside of the hull was undercoated in flat black, and this will be used to create some variation in the dark yellow that will follow. XF88 or dark yellow 2 is then applied to the section, and the paint is thinned to about a 50-50 mix with retarder thinner and is applied in a mottled fashion. Most of the subtleties in this finish will be buried under layers of weathering, however it's a good place to practice your airbrushing and create an interesting foundation to build from. The rubber sections on the return rollers are then brush painted using black grey. When painting the exhaust pipes, I noticed the ends of the pipes were solid, so by carefully drilling the ends of the pipes out with a micro drill, I was able to add a little more refinement to the part. It's just another quick and simple technique to improve your model. The NASHORN Rhino I'd chosen to build was from a reasonably well-known picture from the Eastern Front. The disruptive scheme was interesting, but the element I found most interesting was the way the mud and debris was clumping all around the tracks and the wheels. A small ball of seagrass.
Sea bass!
No, not sea bass, seagrass from AK Interactive is clipped using a pair of scissors to give me the offcuts I need. The trimmings were then blended with the AK Terrain's dark earth textured paste. The textured paste was then stippled around the lower edges of the model, and this will create the volume to the mud that I'm looking for. To further enhance the effect, the clumps of the seagrass were dropped over the wet paste to create greater volume. After about 24 hours, the acrylic paste had fully dried, and it was time to soften the contrast in the colours and create a layer of dusting. A mix of buff and flat earth helps unify the tones and ties the textured mud and debris together. I should note that all of this weathering is being done at this stage whilst I have access to the area, and once the track guards are applied and the wheels and tracks are fitted, access will be a challenge, so it's really just a matter of being efficient at this stage. After a couple of hours, the mud effect was finished off with a series of earth-toned enamel washes, and as a general rule, I keep the darker colours to the lower sections and the lighter colours to the top, and by doing that you're able to create a greater visual depth and weight to the effect. Once the enamels had around an hour to dry off, the layer was then blended using a flat brush with a touch of white spirit, and then by moving the brush in an up and down motion, the washes are not only blended with the model, but there's another layer of streaking created.
Streaking unrelated.
The next phase of the build was the wheels, and construction was simple with a minimum of cleanup. The wheels are then prepared for paint and placed on toothpicks with a small blob of blue tack. This will make the handling of the part so much easier, and the painting of the wheels at this stage is a more efficient way of doing it rather than trying to paint them once they're attached to the model. The wheels are painted in a German grey, and this will represent the rubber sections of the wheels. Then back to one of my favourite tools, the spraying template. And by choosing the appropriate diameter hole, I'm able to quickly fill in the center color of the wheel using the dark yellow paint. The template removes the need to brush paint the wheels, and again, this just makes the painting process of the wheels so much more efficient. Once the paint had dried, the running gear was attached to the model. I pre-painted all of the link and length track sections. Now, pre-painting parts on the sprues isn't the best idea.
What are you talking about, Willis?
Well, it's because of the issues it can cause trying to glue painted parts. But I find pre-painting the tracks is okay because generally speaking, these sections will receive a healthy covering of mud and dirt effects, and any indiscretions on these sections are easily disguised. Again, this is about efficiencies and a bit of an insurance policy. It's just giving us access to the parts whilst we can get it. The top section of the track length is attached to the model, ensuring the sag in the part aligns with the return rollers. Now, to me, I make this pretty straightforward because there is an alignment pin on one of those return rollers that marries up with a hole in the track section. The link and length tracks are arranged on the workbench in the appropriate lengths according to the instructions, and by connecting the parts and using a touch of extra thin cement, I was able to assemble the entire lower section of the track whilst it sat flat on the bench. Moving reasonably quickly, the lower section of the track was then rolled around the drive wheel and idler. And I can do this because the glue is still soft enough to get movement in the part. Then a touch of glue then connects the tracks to itself, and the fit was perfect and the visual weight and sag looked as it should.
That was easy.
That was easy!
Right.
Because the tracks would soon be obscured by the track guards when they were attached, it was important to continue the weathering on these parts whilst I had access. So the mud paste was applied to the track sections now, and whilst it was wet, the seagrass clippings were again pressed into the surface. So I'm essentially mirroring the steps I took on the hole, this time on the track.
I've seen this before.
Once the paste is dry, the track sections receive the same dusting technique to soften the look and unify the colours. Being an out-of-box build, I wasn't able to use things like brass sheet or photo etch, so in order to personalise the model a little more, I thinned plastic from the track guards using a sharp hobby knife, and then set about twisting and bending them up using some flat nose pliers. And by removing the mudguard flap and posing it in the flipped open position, I was able to further add some character to the part without having to go to aftermarket or etch. The inside surfaces of the guards were sprayed in the dark brown colour to act more as a shadowed area than represent the actual colour of the part, but again, it's just about having access to this part before it's attached to the model. The track guards can now be applied to the hull of the model, and as you can see, it would have been really tricky to apply that mud paste with them fixed on. I can turn my focus now to the construction of the fighting compartment, and unfortunately there were a lot of parts that had quite noticeable ejector pin marks. Now, these marks present on the parts are a result of the pins that press the sprues out of the mold in the manufacturing process, and in most cases are unavoidable. Now, some manufacturers are better than others, and better quality kits tend to place these in better spots or less obvious spots than others. However, removing these was just a matter of carefully scraping them off with a small hobby chisel, and in some cases just the edge of the hobby blade was a little more effective.
Attention please.
Well, congratulations, you've made it this far into the video. So firstly, thank you for allowing me on your screens. I truly appreciate it. please hit subscribe and please give us a like if you like the video. It really helps me a lot. I've left links in the show notes to some of the products I've used. There is no sponsorship. These are the products that I use because I like them and I find they work well. Remember to share us around, share this with your friends, and let's enjoy this modeling journey together. Thanks for watching.
Get on with it!
The side walls and ammunition cases are attached to the model, and you may notice I'd pre-painted some of these sections, but the further I went into the build, the more I'd realised I'd missed painting a lot of the pieces. So there would be some painting required in this section regardless. The gun assembly was next up, and a little patience was required to ensure all the pieces aligned. However, all went to plan, and again I'd pre-painted some of these sections to represent the chipping colour. The armoured plates around the fighting compartment have a couple of noticeable weld seams that can be seen in reference photos on some of the corners of the vehicle, and because this was an out-of-box build, I needed to recreate these by just using contents from the box. So a small piece of stretch sprue was first glued to the corner section of the plates, and once set, the part was flooded with extra thin cement, and what that will do is soften the part and allow me to press the weld pattern into that softened part using a tool made from a toothpick and a small piece of bent aluminium. Realistically, the welds are probably out of scale, but I was just looking to add another element to this build. The kit comes with the tow cable molded with the brackets in place, and it's designed to be applied to the front armour plate. However, the NASHORN Rhino I was wanting to build clearly shows the tow cable at the rear of the vehicle, so I carefully set about removing the brackets from the molded part and the shackles, and then set them in place on the front armour plate. I added a little bit of extra detail to the front bracket using a small piece of stretch sprue. Headlight, antenna mount, jack and jack block were all attached to the track guards at this point. Again, using reference pictures, the rear doors are posed in the open position. The kit supplied part comes in one piece, but it was easy enough to just split that in half. I appreciate there are some missing details on the door section, however, being an out-of-box build, I made peace with that and moved past it. The hinges from the doors are removed and then applied to the body of the model, and this will allow me to pose the doors in the open position and have them sitting in a natural way. Now I know I'm supposed to be working out of the box, but I had to represent this tow cable in some way. But in order to comply with the rules are rules, I designed the tow cable to be removable, just to tick that box and stay within the lines on the day of presentation. The tow cable, however, was created using a couple of strands of 0.3mm lead wire, and by twisting the strands in my fingers, I was able to create the cable quickly and easily. The ends of the shackles were drilled out using a fine drill, and the cable was attached using super glue. Once loosely in place, I was satisfied I could get this part to closely match the cable in the reference picture. With the bulk of construction complete, the model was now ready for priming, and because the painting and weathering on the lower edges had all been pre-done, it required masking to avoid overspray, and that was just a simple matter of wrapping those sections using a small piece of aluminium foil. The model was cleaned down with a touch of isopropyl alcohol on a makeup wipe. This helps remove any surface dirt or grease from my fingers that may have contaminated the surface during the build. The model is then primed using Mr. Surfacer 1000 that had been decanted and sprayed through the airbrush. I like using the mix from the can because it is the perfect consistency. However, by spraying it through the airbrush, I am able to control the application far better than I would straight from the rattle can. Well, time is getting away, and I think that's a good spot to finish off this episode.
Isn't it better to finish this now?
No, not today. However, stay tuned for part 2 in a couple of weeks where I'll finish painting and weathering the Rhino.
Go Rhinos!
I'm trying to have a little bit of fun with these videos, so be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to hang around for the end of the video and check out some of the historical footage. Thank you for allowing me onto your screens. I do not take it for granted, and please remember to subscribe and give us a like. It helps me a lot. Remember guys, this is the greatest hobby in the world and we are all in this together. Share it around, share with your friends, connect with your community, and let's enjoy this journey together. Thanks again for watching. See you soon.
Unrelated.